Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP here from Melbourne. I got my very special guest, Ken Womack. The guy is a Beatle legend. How are you today, Ken?
I'm doing great. It sure is great to see you.
Me too. And I want to tell you, this book that you've just released now, John Lennon, 1980, The Last Days in His Life, that is going to become a big bestseller. I can tell you now, I've read it everywhere. You've got fantastic articles left, right, and center all over the internet. Tell me about this book.
Well, I wanted to tell the great comeback story of John Lennon. This is not a true crime book. I'm not interested in the gory details of what happened, the aftermath, but rather the story of how he lived and how he brought this great record into being with his wife Yoko Ono. So I was very excited to tell that story because I think it resonates at a certain point with all of us, right? We all want that great comeback story to be part of our own legends.
Exactly. How long did the book take to write?
I've been working on it for, well, really since, in many ways, I think a lot of people would agree with this. We've all been thinking about it since it happened. It's not one of those wounds that gets better necessarily with time. It gets worse. It becomes more acute. And but in terms of working on it, probably for the last 5 or 6 years, and really thinking deeply about how I wanted to tell that story. And of course, to tell that story means you need to go back into the last 5 years of his life to explain how he got to 1980.
Exactly. I also got to say, I went to the Dakota, outside the Dakota, and to Central Park there, and where that Imagine area is. And I went with my wife, and I mean, the minute you come in front of the Dakota, I'm just saying, to me, I just felt so creeped out that he got shot outside there, the building. And then I went across to the park, and I thought, it's just so sad that he's not with us. That's what really hit me the most. That the guy was there enjoying his life, I'd say semi-retired. The world loved him, and he's there 1 minute and gone the next. That's the thing that really got to me.
I've had very similar experiences there. When I'm in front of the building, which I've done dozens of times, if not more, I always feel I really can't talk. It's a deafening place to be, and I find it very strange now because so many years have passed. It's kind of a Kodak photo spot for tourists, and I find that even stranger. But I do like going to the Mosaic too, across the street and experiencing that. I find more peace really walking around the neighborhood and thinking about what he must have seen, 40 years ago, walking around that little area where he lived on the Upper West Side.
He's just sad. That's all I'm going to say. Really, really sad. And look how much he was going to do. I'm sure he would have kept recording. He's just getting back into it. He was loving life. That's in a nutshell.
Yeah, he was very, very excited. And I hope that I captured that energy because it almost takes off once he gets back to New York City from Bermuda. He is just alive with energy, and it's this increasing momentum. All of the interviews, of course, that thankfully he and Yoko did, because we have so much great testimony about that period and, of course, his Beatles years and his solo years. So that period is just such a rich period for him, and you feel this momentum. Even the slow sales of the album in November didn't matter to him. He was really excited about what he was doing. And, as on the very last night of his life in the studio, as they're listening to what will be the penultimate, I guess, playbacks of Walking on Thin Ice, he says, "This is the direction." And all of that energy, I think, is unmistakable. And this is a guy, we have to remind ourselves, we talk about how he's murdered at 40. He is barely 40. He is just shy, I guess, of 2 months at 40 years old. It's really staggering when we think about it, how young he was, and certainly how young he was, even though we measure years in the same amount of linear time. 40 in 1980 is very different than 40 in the way we think about it in 2020. It is a very different reference point in your life. And for all intents and purposes, he did feel, while he felt the flush of youth and the excitement of the work he was doing, 40 was a different thing. And he was a rock and roller at 40, right? It was hard to even imagine still playing rock and roll at age 40 at that point.
Exactly. But it's like he found his stride, and the world was interested in what he was doing, and he had something new basically to offer the world. That's the most important part.
Absolutely. And while he wouldn't live to see it, his dream for those songs and that music completely pans out and becomes very much a part of our culture, and certainly the great story that he and the other Beatles had started all those years ago.
I interviewed Dan Richter. The guy is amazing. I got to tell you, he's amazing, Ken, because he lived with John and Yoko for 4 years at Titterhurst, right?
That's right. He lived at Titterhurst.
The estate that basically, there's 85 acres there. And I just want to say, here's his book, The Dream Is Over. And what he told me was just fascinating. When I mean fascinating, he's there when John Lennon is actually recording Imagine. And he said, John Lennon told him, we're recording tonight. We're recording tonight. And that night, he had it all. He laid it down. He did the track. And what do you say to actually be there, to see that in life?
It is an amazing story. And, it reminds me of something that I'm always quite fascinated by. And that is the way that John and the other, by that point, former Beatles, but certainly during their heyday as bandmates, the way they would, spend a few hours with a song, and that would be it, right? This song would become this magnificent part of our own lives, and they really only spent a few hours with it, just putting it together in the studio. And of course, there were post-production aspects, but I'm always quite fascinated by that. And there were times when the Beatles were working with George Martin, when they would record 3 or 4 really classic songs in a matter of hours, and in some cases never return to them again.
Unbelievable. But you got to understand, they're in America and coming, let's say, from Liverpool, and they're wanting to spend your life and live there. It's very cosmopolitan there. You know what I mean? Like New York is like 24 hours full on. You can go and have a meal whenever you want. You can do whatever you want. It's like total freedom there. It's like a totally unbelievable place. Do you know what I mean?
I do. As you know, I live just slightly south of the city, and until COVID visited us, I would spend lots of time there, and hope to again someday.
I got to ask you now, with the book, what part do you think of the book that you really like or really stands out for you as an author? Is it some particular story or some part that you think is like, we just need to touch on it at the moment?
Sure. I'm really proud of the section where I uncover the film that inspired John to write Grow Old With Me, which was took a lot of digging, and I'm proud of the work that ultimately brings us that experience and makes it clear how John wrote that song. But more than that, I'm just moved by the rhythms of the story, right? The tender moment. And it's all told in the context of their times and, of course, New York City, which was very different back then. But I'm very moved by the rhythms of the story. The moment when Yoko and John talk about how Double Fantasy isn't selling that quickly, and in just a powerful moment, a moment of beauty, a moment of husband and wife together. Yoko says it's selling kind of slowly, and John said that's okay. We still have the family. And it's so moving. And of course, what's great about John Lennon at that point in his life, as his life is literally only, weeks or days away from ending, he doesn't let that bring him down. That energy that you and I spoke about a moment ago is so palpable and so strong that they're right back in the studio working on Walking on Thin Ice. That's really quite amazing to me. Because I think the younger Lennon, to my understanding of his biographical life, probably would have become bogged down or even depressed about that. Not this guy. He is keeping his eye on the ball, as they say, and he has that wonderful forward momentum. And I'm with you. I think so many great things were ahead of him. He was exactly like I think we would all want to be at 40, right? With this wonderful thrust behind him and moving forward into an exciting but of course unknown future.
But also, like when he spoke of, people were telling him, let's do a Beatle album. You know, you're going to do a Beatle album. Is that going to happen? Or people going to get together? And he said, listen, if you want to hear a Beatle album, take a song from Paul. It's great. Take a song from Ringo. Take a song from George. Take a song from me and put it together. And there's your album. And he said it'll be better than a Beatle album because we're all doing our own thing creatively. And we're not congested into doing something where we can't all do what we want. In other words, we don't have the creative freedom to do everything we want on a Beatles song, where this way we've got total control of what we're doing with our music. And I can totally understand on the creative side that means more than money or commercial success.
Sure. And I'm always reminded when I think about, Beatles reunions and all the pressure they were under, because of course the money was getting bigger and bigger and it was heading toward $1 billion, and that would, of course, if a firm offer had come into play, that obviously would have put extreme pressure on them to be able to do something for charity at that level during that period. And I'm often reminded of this great line from Peter Gabriel during the last moment, the most recent farewell tour from Genesis, I guess. Peter Gabriel was asked, are you ready to get back together with the band? And he said, no, I'll do that, but only when I run out of ideas. And I like that. He wasn't ready. He isn't, I imagine, still not ready for a kind of nostalgia trip, as long as his creative energies are working and he's able to, like he said, come up with new ideas.
Because he's going forward. He's not going backwards.
Right. And Lennon was becoming very much like that too, in a good way.
Now, I've got to ask you, when was the last time Paul actually visited him at the Dakota?
There's a lot of conjecture about that, but I don't think, especially given some remarks that John made in his interview with David Sheff, and some later remarks by Paul, probably the last time they see each other, I guess, is in April 1976, before Paul rejoins Wings for the American leg of the Wings Over America tour. I've seen no convincing evidence that they see each other after that. And despite, I suppose, James McCartney has suggested that he was held by Lennon at one point, but there's just nothing that Paul has ever confirmed to suggest that. And there's nothing I see in the biographical record to see that. Now, having said that, John was a busy person, even though we weren't hearing from him. He was going to Japan because he was free to travel. Paul McCartney is, during that period, one of, if not the biggest star in the world. He has had a magnificent upward trajectory from the beginning of Wings until that period. And he has his own family that is still growing with baby James in 1977. So it's not as though they had lots of free time on their hands. So my understanding is that's probably the last time they saw each other. I just haven't seen convincing evidence yet that suggests there was another time they got together. What I wonder about, and I doubt I'm the only one. In fact, I was talking to a fellow scholar just the other day about this. I doubt, I can't believe that Linda, who always had her camera, didn't take some photos of those moments, especially meeting Sean for the first time, which they did in 1976. I can't imagine Linda, as that great photographer she was, not snapping a few amazing candid shots, just as she had done in those last years of the Beatles.
Yeah, I agree with you, but who knows if some photos do exist.
Right.
And also, I want to say,
what? To his credit, maybe Paul thinks to himself, these are very private photos. These don't need to be out in the world. And
I also assume that they must have kept in touch by phone.
And they certainly did. We know that there were several phone calls, for sure.
Okay. I want to ask you now, Ken, where they can buy the book from. I want everyone in the world to go and buy this fantastic book, and you won't know how good it is until you read it. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, thank you for that. It's thankfully we have a rich world of scholarship that was available to help out, but in a number of new interviews. But I'm very proud of it, and I sure appreciate those comments. And of course, folks can go to their local Amazon, which is local everywhere, and purchase it. And hopefully they'll be able to see it in bookstores. Although, of course, they need to be safe and masked up. Given our pandemic and the challenges that we're all under. And I sure hope people are safe out there. And I know if they're your listeners and your audience, Plastic EP, they must be so.
Also got to ask, if they want the book signed, can they get it through you direct or through your publisher? Have you got signed copies too?
I'm happy, folks routinely send me books, and I go to the post office wearing my mask and send it back. So I'm happy to do that. I'm available on Facebook, and I'm always happy to help out when folks do that.
Ken, I just want to say, I love the book. I've seen the cover. I've heard a lot about it. It's all over the net now with reviews. You're getting fantastic reviews about the book, and they don't write good reviews unless the book's good. And I can tell you now, this is an excellent book. Don't hesitate. Took so long to write the book. You're paying next to nothing to get a fantastic book for your Beatle collection bookshelf. And I'll tell you what, I love it. Thanks again, Ken.
Thank you, Plastic. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. See you, everyone.